Well, I want to start by telling you that I think the universe has conspired for the timing of this because this weekend, no lie, I am knee deep in the UC application with my 2 daughters, Ryan and Mimi.
Wow.
Yep, seniors. And I have been literally channeling your voice like that that very grounded, like, Paige, remember there's over 4,000 universities in the United States. Like, they're gonna be fine. They're gonna be fine. So, yes, you have made a big impact on me with your
Well, I'm glad.
perspective. Yes. So, that's where I wanna start is your connection to education, and, I think we gotta go to South Carolina first 'cause we have to hear about the grandmother, and we have to hear about
Well,
the
okay.
upbringing.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that. Everything for me does start in South Carolina.
Yeah.
I am from one of those Black South Carolina families that has been there as longer than anybody can remember. There is at least one bill of sale in my family that is dated 1732
Wow.
for one of my ancestors. I was a South Carolinian before South Carolina was a state.
Yeah, I love it.
And
The
just
roots, deep
shortly
roots.
after South Carolina was a colony, I am very much a South Carolinian. And of course, mine is the kind of family that, while we measure our time in South Carolina in centuries, our citizenship in South Carolina is measured in decades, just
Yeah.
barely.
Yeah.
As the first person in my family to cast a vote was alive during my lifetime.
Wow.
Right. So being a South Carolinian means all the things that being a South Carolinian means. And so mine is the kind of family that believes in education because for so long it was denied us.
Yeah.
My father was the first in his family to go to college, may well have been the first in his family to graduate high school. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But all of that was as a result of his mother, my grandmother, Audra Livingston Edge, who is the reason that education has been at the center of my life and my career for these 50 years.
Yeah.
Every conversation I had with my grandmother that I can remember started with, "Baby, did you get your lesson today?"
Oh gosh. I love that so
And
much. Baby, did you get your lesson today?
did you get your lesson? Right? So
It's beautiful.
even just the construction of how she said
Yeah.
it, Paige, there's a lesson for you out there. It's your responsibility to go and acquire it and bring it back.
Yes.
That's the way she talked about it.
Yes.
That there is something good in the world that I'm sending you out there to look for, to
Mm.
cultivate, and bring back. That's what she said. Did you get your lesson today? And one of the lessons that she taught me, I don't know that she intended to teach me, because I may have told you this before, Paige, but your audience should hear it as well.
Please.
I was a senior in high school. In the spring of my senior year, I had already been accepted to Harvard and decided I was going there.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting on the enormous impact my grandmother had had on my life. So I sat down at 18 years old to write a letter to my grandmother codifying the impact she personally had had on my life. And my dad, her son, comes in to my room as I'm writing. He says, "So what are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing grandma a letter." And he said, "Who?" And I said, "Grandma, your mother, you know?" And he said, "You know, mama can't read." I'm like, "What are you talking about? She can't read."
Yeah.
Mama stopped going to school at third grade. She can't read. I'm like, her house is full of books. All the first books I ever read were in her house. Bitch,
Yeah.
wait a minute, she can't read. And then suddenly it's dawning on me a whole lifetime of being the way this magnificent woman coped with her illiteracy.
Yeah.
Maybe, can you read the Sunday school lesson for me tomorrow in church? I can't find my glasses.
Yeah.
Or driving down the road to her, you know, we're going to Conway. I bet you can't tell me when the sign says Conway, Do you know how to do that? Yes, grandma, I know how to do that.
Yeah.
I absolutely can do that. That her house was full of books for me.
Yeah.
She couldn't read them, but she knew they were important. And so she bought books and filled her house with them for me and her other grandchildren and the other kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So my earliest memories are sitting in my grandmother's house reading while other people are also reading because she created this library in her
Yeah.
house. I spent my summers at her house near Myrtle Beach instead of Columbia, where I was growing up in South Carolina. And, I'm sure at this point I memorized the 1968 Encyclopedia Britannica that was in the house that I read over and over and
Did
over
anybody
again.
keep that set of encyclopedias? I miss that
You know what?
set.
I will have to find where that set is.
This 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 is a
I bet my
sign.
uncle has it
Yeah.
somewhere. I bet my uncle. He still lives in the house, so I
Oh,
bet
it's
it's
so
still.
good.
I bet it's still there. But here I was, 18 years of talking every time I spoke to her about my education, and she could not read.
Yeah.
And that faith in something she knew she was denied, that faith that I could acquire it, I could get it. Did you get your lesson, Jeff? That's what created this life for me. I was asked to do the eulogy at her funeral,
How old were you,
and
Jeff, when she passed? How old were you?
I was in my 40s when she passed. And the title of my eulogy was "We Got the Lesson,
Oh,
Grandma." Because I wasn't the only one in that church who had had that relationship with her. I
right.
wasn't the only one in that church who had learned to read in the house of a woman who could not read herself. And
Yeah.
so understanding how important education is to those who've been denied it has been driving my career
Yeah.
forever. I don't have the right not to value
Yeah.
education, if only on her behalf, if not mine. So
Yeah.
that's what South Carolina brings into this conversation. I know you've got your Louisiana roots,
I
and
do, but I think your passion for education and knowing that part about you and just that perspective of how much it matters,
mhm,
how those early messages matter and also how much it matters for future generations. And
that's
I'm
right.
very inspired by your commitment to the future in every way. And we'll get to AI and that kind of stuff that you're working on now, but
Right.
like your perspective, your openness to how you can set it up better and make a pathway for these kids of all backgrounds, of all different types of intelligences, of all race, of all ethnicity. That perspective, you definitely gave me that in a different way.
Well, thank you so much, Paige. You and I are both Southerners, and so people of our vintage who grew up in the South read probably more Faulkner than was useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I'm always like, shouldn't I love it more? Like so many people talk about it. Why am I not getting
I
some
I
of it?
do kind of like Faulkner, but I particularly like a quote that I use of his all the time. That in the South, the past is not only not forgotten, it's not even past.
Yes. That is
Right? It's
so
right
true.
there.
Yes, it's
And
right
I mean,
there.
you live in Southern California now. I live in New York,
Yeah.
but we both know that there are places, physical pieces of dirt on this earth where you belong and where I belong
Yes. Oh, it's
that we are
beautiful.
tied to, that we saw it.
Yeah.
We buried my grandmother 4 rows over from her grandmother.
So awesome.
The funeral took place in a church that was built immediately after emancipation in a grove
Wow.
where my enslaved ancestors used to hold their religious
Yeah.
services. I know I'm from this place, right? You see it, you live
Yeah.
it. History is now in the South. And I think that's something that you and I we know, right?
Yeah.
We have this connectedness
Yeah.
that lots of people who are our neighbors today don't get. Literally, because we're Americans, they don't have a connection to anywhere where their family has been
Yeah.
for generations and generations. And I just do, right?
Yes.
I know
Yes.
where I belong in the world.
Yeah.
She left through graveyard.
Yeah.
'Cause that is the fastest route to the summer education program at church when I was with my
Yeah.
grandmother the summer, right? A graveyard that I'm related to everybody in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
graveyard. And, there's nothing like a 5-year-old walking through a graveyard on the way to an educational programs, you
Yeah.
know, help you think about a metaphor for your
Right.
life, right?
Well, it definitely gives you perspective, which you
It
have.
does.
And I think
It
that's a
does.
big
It
part
does.
of leadership is having perspective. Will
Yeah,
you
yeah.
tell us what your family thought of you going to Harvard? And
You
if
know,
you
it's
if Harvard resonated with you, what did you think of Boston? You get there and you're in this academic mecca. What was that like?
so what's really interesting. Let me tell you the story of why Harvard.
Yeah.
You know me long enough to know that I'm a special kind of nerd, and
Yes. I love
I
this. I was
embrace it.
hoping you were gonna
I
say this
embrace
about
it.
yourself, a self-proclaimed nerd.
I am in the summer between the 7th and 8th grade at my grandmother's house.
Yeah.
I read 2 biographies, one of W.E.B. Du Bois and one of John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Earlier that year, I had read a Franklin Roosevelt biography as well. And what do those 3 people have in common? They were educated at Harvard.
Okay.
So I decided then that my measure of whether I had done high school right was going to be whether or not I got into Harvard College.
Yeah.
And so I started studying then, 7th grade,
Yeah.
what it takes to get into Harvard. I ordered the application every year starting that summer,
Wow.
and South Carolina is a small place.
Yeah.
So I spoke to every one of the South Carolinians who got into Harvard that I could find between the 7th grade and then modeled myself on that. So much so that I had noticed that until my year of applying in 1988, for most of the years before that, only one African American from South Carolina had gotten in.
Yeah.
So I was like, how do I get to be the one African American? So I knew who my competition was.
Yeah.
I knew that Julie was at R&E. I knew that John was at Lexington.
Yeah.
I knew who the competition was, who had the grades, the test scores, and the awareness of college to be my competition for
Yes.
that. And
Yes.
I was paying close attention to them. They all still laugh at me now because so when John Sneed told me he was going to Yale early and his girlfriend let us and she was going to Princeton, I'm like, check, check. All right. In our year was the first year that Harvard admitted 3 African Americans
Yeah.
from the same year. Me and Dina and John.
I love
Students
it.
from Lexington were there. And they were like, we weren't thinking about this. We were just applying. I was like, look, I was serious. I had a plan. And
Yeah.
I knew my SAT scores were higher than John's. I knew
It was
he was
strategic.
student body president. I was only senior class president. It was a crazy kind of thing. But the move from South Carolina
Yeah.
to Harvard is the biggest cultural adjustment I had ever seen.
Yeah.
My freshman year at Harvard, a friend of mine, Jennifer, who was the one African American admitted 2 years ahead of me, took me to lunch in Harvard Square. She showed me a photograph of the Bunker Hill National Monument and made me promise never to get any closer to it than that photograph
Yeah.
because it was in a neighborhood that was notorious for violence during the busing times of
Wow.
Boston. And, I couldn't think of anywhere in South Carolina where I should be reasonably afraid for my physical safety
Yeah.
because I am Black. But there were places in Boston that people said I shouldn't go at noon in a tank.
Yeah.
And that was a weird thing. And then a couple of weeks later, was when that guy killed his pregnant wife
Mhm.
in Boston and said a black guy did it.
Okay.
And I was a freshman at Harvard when
Yeah,
that was happening.
terrifying.
And I got a
Yeah.
call from the Harvard police suggesting that I should stay on campus
Wow.
for the next few weeks. Um, and the unstated reason was that they could protect me on campus, but they weren't sure they could protect me if I went wandering around Boston.
Yeah.
And, again, like the police saying, don't go over there because the Boston police might charge you with
Yeah.
murder. It's just a very, very, very
So
different
different. Yeah.
kind of a world. And then I'm in this environment where my next door neighbor in the dorm, when her mother came to visit, they changed the flag on University Hall
Mm.
because she was Pakistani ambassador to the United
Wow.
States, right? This is who you see,
Yes.
at these places. So it was a profound cultural adjustment. Being from South Carolina means snow is a half day event every other year, February, and
Yeah.
it's like, a quarter inch of ice.
Yeah.
So when it started snowing in Boston in Harvard Yard, I didn't know how to walk in this stuff.
Yeah.
I also didn't know how to dress for this stuff. So I did two dumb things. One is I bought fur lined boots
Yeah.
and wore them without socks. So you and I come from places where we know what it smells like when an animal has died. And then I realized that there was a betting pool. I'm in Harvard Yard. There was a betting pool. People went to their windows to watch me walk to my first class and bet on how far I would get before I fell down the
Yeah.
first time. Because I didn't know how to do this. Like, this is how my cultural and physical adjustment
Yeah.
to Harvard went.
This is
Like,
Jeff, you should know in Los Angeles, that's what it's like people driving in the rain. It's like,
right.
and being from New Orleans, the rain is part of the deal. Although now that
It
I've
is
been here so
solid.
long, I've grown out of it. But when I first got to LA, it was like, oh my gosh, it's drizzling. Are you
That's right.
leaving early? Or are you even leaving? Or, driving in the rain is a big deal.
If you're from New
So I can
Orleans, if you can't
relate.
drive in the rain, you
Right.
can't go anywhere,
Right.
any of the spots.
You better stay home all
But
summer.
but I had that cultural adjustment. But then I settled into it.
Yeah.
And it was a huge intellectual experience for me.
Yes.
It was this huge um adjustment of my worldview for me.
Yeah.
Because again, I came from a place where my goal in life was to go to college, go to law school, and someday earn $75,000 a year and live in a house worth
Yeah.
$150,000. That was my goal in
Done.
life.
Yes. Then you'll be happy.
And I'll be happy and my family would be safe and
Yeah.
secure. And then I get to a place surrounded by people who are of an age when you're in college, when you start coming into the trust funds that were set up for
Yes.
you.
Yes. And you
And
understand what that looks like. Yeah.
that's a very different
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
world. They have a very different experience. Their notions of what impact they can have on the earth are very different from mine.
Yes.
And you know what? I'm here too.
Yeah.
Maybe that means I'm supposed to be thinking bigger too. But it
Yeah.
was a fascinating.
So you're on the road to law school. I mean, I met you pretty young. I thought of us as so different because I felt like your leadership and your just sense of the world, you were so much more had so much more global awareness. I was coming to California. I went from New Orleans to Nashville and then all the way to San Francisco. I was like, what's happening? And you had like a
Right.
global sense. So we're not that far apart in age. So you were pretty young when,
No,
you're starting a startup,
I
educational
was.
company. So tell us
So
about how that started in your
I
mind.
I never had the slightest indication or inkling that I would professionally be involved in education
Yeah.
until well after I had started my professional life. I went to work on Wall Street, as one did if one was graduating from an Ivy League college and determined never to be poor again.
Yes.
And so I went to Wall Street, to Merrill Lynch in financial derivatives.
Yeah.
It turned out that I had a skill that was valuable. I could translate calculus into English, and lots of people were better at calculus than I was. But
Yeah.
not many other people could explain to a chief financial officer who called himself Bubba or Rhett what exactly he was buying. And that turned out to be a valuable tool. And
Yes.
so I progressed very quickly at Merrill.
Yeah.
I went from being an analyst to an associate to being a vice president before I was 25 years old.
Yeah.
And one day, the head of equities came to me and said, "We need a derivative specialist in Atlanta, Jeff." I was living in New York City at the time. "And we know you have Southern roots. We'd like you to consider moving to Atlanta to our institutional office in Atlanta." And
Yeah.
of course, I said, "I will consider it carefully." And in my head, I'm like, there is nothing in my apartment in Brooklyn that I need. I should go to LaGuardia right now before
Yeah.
they change the alarm. And so I did move to Atlanta and continued my career serving large institutional investment banking clients in the South. So I reached the point where I had a decision to make, Paige. I either was going to accept that I had peaked in my career, and this was a nice peak, right? I'm
Yeah.
making New York City money in Atlanta. You know, this is a nice peak. If ever you get the chance to be a single, very well paid African American man who goes to church without anybody forcing him to in Atlanta, I highly recommend that. It's a
It's so
really, really
good.
good life.
It's so good.
So I could peak there. I could move back to New York
Yeah.
to keep going. I could go to business school and get an MBA, or I could go and start a business with two of my best friends.
Yeah.
I chose that final door and moved to East Palo Alto, where my partner and his sister were living, and started a college prep company that was based on the work I had done at Harvard, helping others get into
Yeah.
Harvard, and the
Yeah.
work that I had done helping my business partner apply to law school. And that's how I got into education.
What do you care the most about in education? What keeps you there? Because you've been there ever since. I mean,
I
it's been
have.
years,
I've never
decades
left.
now.
I
Yeah.
I understand that in the same way that I stand on the shoulders of people who made life possible for me,
Yeah.
I have a responsibility to make sure that the path that I have traveled is one that others can travel too.
Yeah.
I think that education, a good education, leading to college and a well paying career, is the one proven, scalable, repeatable pathway out of poverty I have seen.
Yeah.
And if I can help more people on that path, then I will have justified some of the extra space I take up on the earth.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
that's what I wake up every morning doing, is thinking about kids like me who need someone like me to make sure that that path stays open for them.
Yes.
And that's why I never intend to leave. And
Yeah.
that's why I do what I do now.
How do you think we're doing with that? Like, where do we get it right? And where do you feel like those pathways could be wider and more accessible?
So here's where we are. While I still believe that there is no better, more proven way to move a family from poverty to a life of choices, we still don't do that for very many people. It's
Yeah.
still far, far, far too rare. I'm not willing to give up this pathway until we find a better one.
Yeah.
right? It's too rare. It's too hard. The fact remains that someone like me who has spent his professional life in education, I could go to a maternity ward and tell you who's going to go to college
Yeah.
and be right most of the time. I could tell you based on whether there's a father nervously waiting or not,
Yeah.
whether there has been enough prenatal care,
Yeah.
how old the mother is, all those things. And I, unfortunately can predict it. And then I could go to an elementary school, to a kindergarten, and I can see it too.
Yeah.
There are some kids who come home from the hospital wrapped in an LSU blanket.
Go Tigers.
Those kids are going to college,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And almost nobody else is,
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah.
So I don't think we do as good a job at it. At one point in my life, since you and I worked together, I was senior vice president of college and career readiness at McGraw-Hill Education.
Okay.
And I was responsible for all the things that your daughters are going through around college,
Yes.
right now, for
Yes.
McGraw-Hill Education, among other things. And one of the things we did was we commissioned some surveys, and we surveyed students who were going to be first generation college students
Yeah.
and asked them a lot of questions about their lives, including, why do you want to go to college? We also surveyed high school teachers and college professors and high school guidance counselors about why students should want to go to college.
Yeah.
Turns out the students who were going to be first generation had 10,000 different ways of saying, so my family won't be poor anymore.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
why they wanted to go to college.
That's the
So my
motivation.
family won't
Yeah.
be poor anymore. Now, their teachers had lots of other reasons for
Yeah.
why they should be. But almost none of them said, so this kid won't be poor anymore. Professors could talk about the life of the mind and contributions to society, but not, so my family won't be poor anymore. And
Yeah.
so I discovered at that point just how disconnected the why of the student and the why of those of us who are adults are
Yeah.
around college.
And
And
how do we close that gap?
so I think we have to, and what I spend a lot of my time doing is saying, if a student wants to spend her life and energy being the first person to move from poverty to a life of choices,
Yeah.
choices like we can go to the hospital if one of us gets sick,
Yeah.
choices like we could plead innocent if we're charged with a crime we didn't commit, choices, choices like I'm pursuing this career because I want to, not because I need to. If she wants to devote her life to making enough money to do that, we should say yes.
Yeah.
That's okay. We should make that perfectly acceptable. And in so doing, we have to say to her that if that is your goal, maybe you shouldn't be an English major,
Yeah.
right? I have said to the horror of lots of people I love, is your family rich enough for you to major in psychology,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, that's the reality of the world that we live in, that economic inequality is a real thing.
Yeah.
And those of us on the comfortable side of that divide have no right to impose our preferences on those who are on the uncomfortable side of
Yeah.
that divide, including telling them to major in whatever they want to and pursue college that way. The other thing we do, Paige, is when we're not careful, we equate college attendance and college graduation,
Yes. Oh, you really taught me this one.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are not the same thing.
Will you say that? Yeah, your
So
point of
for
view on that?
most
Yeah.
people, attending college and graduating from college are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so when a student is thinking about what academic discipline they want to pursue, if their goal is to not be poor anymore, I have to say to them, how valuable do you think half an English degree is
Yeah.
versus half an electrical engineering degree?
Yeah.
Because the assumption that you will absolutely graduate is simply incorrect for a great many kids.
Yeah.
And that is a disservice that those of us who have means do to those who don't.
Yeah.
And, because college for poor kids is a race with disaster, and the kind of disaster that would not be a disaster for your children.
Yeah.
Disaster like, you know, the carburetor on mom's car went out and she needs $400 to fix it.
Yeah.
Your kids wouldn't even know that happened.
Yeah.
Whereas a poor kid suddenly does not have their portion of tuition because they had to pay that so their younger siblings could keep eating and mom could keep going to work. That's the
Yeah.
kind of disaster that gets you off track if you're poor, but you don't even notice if you come from a family of means. And
Yeah.
so saying attendance and graduation are the same thing is doing those kids a disservice. And I most often yell at reporters for doing that.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like,
Well, I think that's a big part of this conversation is like how we do talk about it
that's right.
collectively. That's why I want you here, sharing this conversation with me so my people who are interested can hear your perspective because it certainly impacted me just being in a personal relationship with you and the work that we did with these kids, helping kids get into college. When you really get in the real work of it and you meet
Mhm.
students of different backgrounds with different means, you see the perspective. And then I'm living this right now. I mean, I'm living through
That's
getting my
right.
2 kids into college, and it's really gnarly. You get in these little rabbit holes where it's like,
That's right.
oh, I have to guide them through a different opening scene of their essay. And I know how to work with essays. We're doing great. They've been lovely. They're totally receiving my help.
Of
And at the
course.
same time, it's like, we're going to be fine. Like
That's
the
right.
essay matters, like you told me, the essay matters a little bit more than you want it to, but not as much as you think it does. And
That's
literally,
right.
Jeff Livingston, I have had that on a card for the past 3 months. And my listeners who either have people who are in college or who have high schoolers and they're going to be going through this, it's that perspective of
That's
like
good.
the bigger picture of all this. And,
You know,
and I,
something
yeah, go ahead.
something else I know your daughters are
Yeah.
going to take with them to college that I want your listeners also to make sure their students take with them to college. Your daughters understand how privileged and blessed they are
Yes, they do. Yeah.
and how unusual their circumstances are.
Yeah.
And for your listeners, I want them to say to their students when they go off to college that I was listening to Paige's podcast and this giant black man from South Carolina who adores Paige said the following thing. There is a concept called emergency student aid.
Mhm.
When I say those words, most of your listeners think I mean the last $1,000 they need to be able to go to college.
Yeah.
Emergency student aid is food banks
Yeah.
that lots of students who are in college, even in the colleges that your children go to, are food insecure.
Yeah.
And that is a reality that it's too easy to ignore or not see. But now someone has heard me say this.
Yeah.
And so they're going to ask, does UC Berkeley have a food bank? And the
Yeah.
answer is yes, they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Does Princeton have extra money to buy winter coats or food or to help kids get home at Christmas? Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Because inequality is a real thing. And so long as we live in a country where we don't want the circumstances of your birth to determine all of the outcomes of your life, we have to remember those things
Yes.
and keep that in mind. Your daughters will know that when
Yeah.
they're in college next year. And I hope your listeners also keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
That for most kids of our social economic status, college is 5 years of irresponsibility followed by a 4-year degree.
Yes. Yes.
But that's not the experience of all the kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
For a lot of kids, it's a slog from the beginning. It's a race against disaster. It is
Yeah.
hard every day. They know how much they could get if they pawned their computer.
Right. Right. So what do you think college is? What purpose does it serve? I know what you said earlier, it helps people get out of poverty and that really matters. And that's a
Right.
clear, people are motivated by that. What about the person who isn't thinking as much about that? What's the
So
gift of it? Where's the engagement with these kids around
I
college?
think I think the gift of college is the opportunity to live really close to people who are not like you,
Yeah.
right? I don't happen to think that what happens in the classroom at Harvard or Princeton or UC Berkeley and what happens in the classroom at, LSU or
Yeah.
Sewanee is all that different. And I don't think
Right.
that matters.
Right.
The real thing is, who are you sharing a dorm room with? Who is
Yeah.
sitting next to you in those classrooms? And what is it that you can learn about their lives that enhances your life and makes it better?
Yeah.
So if, you and I both come from places where it is easy to spend your whole academic life from kindergarten through medical school in a
Yeah.
room full of people you have known your whole life.
That's right. Yeah.
And I often encourage kids not to do that.
Yeah.
That, your best friend in kindergarten in Metairie is never going to be hard for you to find,
Yeah.
right? Your
Yeah.
mom knows where she is right now. Right?
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
go and find her. Go meet some different people,
Yeah.
the people whose lives you don't understand, because I think it is in those connections that we begin to create the kind of community that makes this American experiment of democracy possible,
Yes. I
right?
love that you
That
said that. Yeah, go ahead.
nobody older than you and me
Mhm.
in Louisiana or in South Carolina
Yeah.
had 12 years of K 12 with people of different races,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
Ruby
Yeah.
Bridges, the first African American student to be in a classroom with white students in Louisiana, is today 70 years old, Paige.
Yeah.
She is alive. She looks 50, but she's, she's
Yeah.
70 years old. She's
Yeah.
alive. I was born in the colored wing of a public hospital in
Yeah.
December of 1970. We haven't been trying to do this living together and studying together for very long. And so
Yeah.
college is the opportunity really to understand the complexity of our society
Yeah.
and to get to put yourself in the shoes of someone else.
Yeah.
And that's what I want for your daughters when they're in college. I want them
Yeah.
to meet people who blow their minds. Who in the world is this person? How are they
Yeah.
thinking about this? What is going on?
Yeah. That's kind
Because
of what you
that's
did
what
for me, Jeff. That's what you did.
but I think that what the beautiful thing
Yeah.
is about college. Yes, you don't need college to be the way that
Yeah.
you transform your family's economic circumstances.
Well, I love that you said that because I was talking to Miles the other day about his grades. He's a ninth grader,
Mhm.
and we were talking about a subject that he doesn't like that much, and so I was trying to engage him in a conversation about learning how to think, and being in a group situation with other students and what he can contribute as opposed to just mastering this curriculum that he may or may not use. And it was in math. So it's like, well, there's going to be calculators and there's going to be, as we move forward,
Right.
people who are really skilled or robots who do this thing.
And
Um,
robots, not or,
and
and
yes,
robots.
and robots. And we had this great conversation because I was telling him, just similar to your idea, of the real value of the engagement of his academic life is to be with other students. Ask somebody in your class who's better at you at math and talk to that person and work with that person. And it's the relationship of collaborating and the humanity. I mean, I don't know if I use the word humanity with him, but with you, I'm thinking that's what I'm interested in these kids knowing, their emotional intelligence and how to be in relationship and
Mhm.
how to move through the world in a way that's authentic is what is going to be so valuable. And I want to
So
say this last thing before you
go ahead.
comment, because you really helped me with this. I felt like because you were one of my first jobs out of college, we met when I was 23. I had one other job before I got to you guys, to Achieva. I felt like your leadership and working so closely with you really helped me understand, because you would say to me, "Paige, be yourself." Like, what I need you to do when you're guiding, when you're selling our programs and converting people, because it's a sale, you're
Mhm.
selling a program that costs money. That, to me, that idea of bring who you are to
Mhm.
your job, I don't know why I didn't get that message, but when I was coming out of college, I had a very, like, I've got to perform. I've got to
That's
achieve.
right.
I've got to do what the boss says, and I have to do it better than they expect me to do it. And you came along and said, "Yeah, these are going to be the skill set. This is what I expect of you, and also be yourself." And I
That's right.
think that that is going to be. I want to hear your thoughts on this, but it feels like that's what is so important right now
I
to
think that's right.
students and to moving forward. And so, can you talk to us about that and
I
the work in
will.
technology?
Let me do this, Paige. Let me first talk about Miles, and then I'll talk to
Yeah,
Miles.
please,
Okay?
please.
My decades in education have taught me a few things for certain.
Yeah,
And one of those is that Miles is going to be okay.
yeah,
There is no school so bad that it can irreparably destroy the education of a student whose educated mother is actively involved in his education. There is no school
yeah. I love
that
that.
is bad enough to do irreparable harm to Miles because you are his mom. And I think that's important. Now, the analog is I'm still deciding if it's possible for a school to be good enough to overcome the lack of parental involvement
Yeah,
in a student's education. A couple come really, really close, but Miles has the important thing. Now,
yeah.
let me talk to Miles. So, Miles is in the ninth grade.
Yes,
Well, he's gonna likely be in probably next year or the year after in a trigonometry class
yes,
talking about sine and cosine. And Miles is going to ask a question like, when am I ever going to need this?
yes.
And some teacher is going to lie to Miles. He is never going to need that. He is never going to need
Yeah,
that. The education system has not yet caught up to the fact
yes,
that nobody needs to know that kind of thing anymore because computers do those things for us. But what he is going to need to know is how to work in a group with people,
yeah,
how to handle the situation when you're responsible for a group project, you're doing your part, but the other person isn't.
yes.
Where you're responsible for a group project, and Paige, I mean, the smart girl in class, wants to do all of the work and leave you all out. How to handle that?
Yeah,
That's going to be something he's going to need the rest of his life.
yeah,
That's what I call a durable skill. That's what he needs to practice. He needs to understand how to teach himself.
yeah,
Because I sometimes think about my mother's father, my grandfather, whom I never knew. He died months before I was born. But he made his living as a tobacco farmer. in South Carolina. Probably by the time he was 18 years old, he knew 80% of what he ever needed to know to be a tobacco
Yeah.
farmer.
Yeah.
Certainly by the time he was 30, he knew absolutely everything he needed to know. I don't even know what kind of job is going to be available for Miles in 10 years,
Yes.
let alone
Yes.
how he would, what I'm going to be doing in 10 years.
Yeah.
So, what used to be a system where you learned in your youth what you need and then amortize that over a working life, that is gone.
Yeah.
Miles needs to be flexible. He needs to be creative. He needs to know how to learn stuff. He needs to know how to unlearn stuff.
Yeah.
Because there are things G and I were taught in AP Bio that aren't true anymore.
That's right.
Right? We
Yeah.
need to know how to unlearn stuff. So I think Miles is right. There will be calculators, but there won't be something that teaches him how to frame a problem in such a way that he can break it into pieces and solve it.
Yeah.
You will always have close at hand tools that can solve the pieces, but framing the problem is going to be his.
Yeah.
Understanding how to move through the world that is constantly changing, that's what he needs to know.
Yeah.
College can be that. I always encourage kids, again, especially kids for whom not being poor is not the point of college,
Yes.
to take a class that scares the hell out of you,
Yeah.
right? To because you're making an F, so what? Just graduate. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Take it. Understand what it means to do a hard thing
Yeah.
and understand what it means at the beginning and learn to know the joy of realizing that you can actually do this hard thing,
Yes.
right? Understand what reservoirs of talent and energy and creativity you have because you have no choice but to call on them in this class. Do that, do the hard thing.
Yeah.
And that's where growth comes from. And if you keep to that, if you keep doing the hard thing, you develop a muscle memory. You develop a sense that if I work hard enough, I can do this,
Yeah.
right? And my mom has been telling me this my whole life, but turns out she was right, right? That I can handle this. And that's what I want for kids who are going to college. I want that resilience. I want I want those qualities that will endure no matter what the technology has in store for us.
Yes.
And because what we did, we were trained in a particular discipline to move forward through our lives in that discipline. That is ancient history.
Yes.
We cannot know what is
W-
happening.
What's your take on a passion versus do something you're good at?
So here's my take on that. I think that what you're good at and passion are aligned.
Mhm.
When kids Miles's age, ninth grade, tell me
Yeah.
they're passionate about something, I usually say, okay, you're passionate, but you haven't seen the whole list of possibilities yet. So they're usually passionate about music or gaming or the things that are in their lives. But later on, you realize what you're really good at. And what you're really good at will encourage you to keep going and maybe become one of the world's best. And along the way, you'll be passionate about that thing too.
Yeah.
Right? Figure out what you're good at. And you know it when you get there. You know when you get to that point.
Yeah.
I figured out that I'm a pretty good storyteller. I'm a pretty good communicator. And so I was a good communicator when I was translating calculus into English
Yeah.
for people. I was a pretty good communicator when I was with you helping students make college choices and helping recent college graduates like you come to
Yeah.
realize how wonderful they are all by themselves and they don't have to pretend to be anybody else. And so my leaning into my being a good communicator has been valuable to me no matter what I do.
Yeah.
And so the passions align with those skills there.
Yeah.
I think that Miles knows what interests him now,
Mhm.
and he knows what he's passionate about now, but he doesn't understand the depth of what the word passion means. And he hasn't been exposed to a whole bunch of stuff,
Yeah.
which is why, even when we worked together all those many years ago, I encourage students never to go to a college that's only good at one thing.
Mhm.
It's going to change your mind,
Yeah.
right? You're going to change your mind. I usually say, Paige, that asking a college freshman what they want to be when they grow up is only slightly more informative than asking a kindergartner.
Yeah. That's true. I'm living
Right?
with that. Yeah.
They don't know. They don't
Yeah.
know, and they can't know because things
Yeah.
are changing so much. So explore, figure out what you're good at,
Yeah.
and lean into that. That's what I would say to Miles if I were talking to
Yeah.
him. Own what you care about, but explore before you decide.
Will you tell us, and because I know our time is coming to a close, I really want to hear from you. What are you hopeful about the future? And I know in your work you are at the forefront of how technology is going to hit our school system. Now we've heard you, we know what you stand for. You're all about authenticity and finding this, what you're good at, meeting your passion, and really being curious about the future and open to how it's going to change. So I know that you stand for that. And I know that you know a lot about that because you're working in that space. What are the good things about this? I mean, I know we could make a long list of what we're worried about. I mean, there's
You
a lot to
could.
be worried about in our country, but tell me where your optimism lies.
So I am excited about the technological revolution and its possibilities
Yeah.
for opening up more opportunities for more people. Paige, that I have leaned way in to this generative AI movement.
Oh yeah.
That some people think that we are too far along the hype cycle. I am hype number one, and I don't think we're nearly hyped enough
You're day one, as my
about it. I
teenagers would
am
say. Well,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely there. And I'm there because we are still in the part of this revolution where most of us are responding to what the software engineers can imagine. And we're
Yeah.
going to get to the point where we imagine what we insist the software engineers do. And these things are really powerful. You and I both come from places where lots of people have no access to healthcare.
Yeah.
We are on the cusp of a point where everyone will have in their pocket a qualified nurse to answer their questions.
Yeah.
And dude, we're not talking about Google. We're talking about really qualified and understood. That's going to open up possibilities. That you and I grew up in a world where there were problems of data that were just too big to handle. That's not going to exist anymore,
Yeah.
right? We're going to be able in the not too distant future to understand exactly what is happening in Miles' brain when he is reading a book.
Oh boy. I don't
Right.
want to read that code.
It's, but I mean, and so the excitement there is
Yeah.
so
It's
amazing.
incredible. Yeah.
And lots of people are thinking, oh my goodness, what happens if all this goes wrong? I choose to think, what happens if everything goes right?
Yeah.
What if we do this the right way? What's happening today is, again, software engineers who live very near the places where you and I first met in Silicon Valley are bringing to life the science fiction they read as adolescents. These are
That
not
is so
especially
true. Yeah.
creative people of the
Yeah.
world. For example, Paige, they think that what all of us want is to engineer out the people of our education and just learn from a computer. That is not what everybody
No.
wants. And so the excitement is that very soon we won't need the future to be mediated by their worldview, by their limitations. We'll be able to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
We'll each have a computer scientist in our pocket who can build us the thing we can imagine. And what we might imagine is a democracy that's more representative,
Yeah.
that spreads opportunity better than we have been able to figure out now, that raises the floor of health and nutrition,
Yeah.
and opportunity in ways we could not think of before. So that's what excites me, that we get to be alive during a moment and in a country that could, if we choose to, align a technological revolution with a history of more and more freedom for more and more people,
Yeah.
and create something new in the world that spreads joy, that spreads hope, that spreads opportunity. And that's what I have to live in. Now,
Mm.
we're talking 2 weeks after an election that I was not happy about,
Yeah.
but I still believe in that. I still
Yeah.
believe we can do that. We've been through dark times before,
Mhm.
um, but we've never been in a better position to handle those times, to survive those times, and to look forward towards a future where, via education reimagined,
Yeah.
more and more voices get to be a part of the conversation. More and more dreams get to be realized. More and more creativity gets to be applied to the world we live in. And that's what keeps me hopeful, Paige. That I know that while you might have been the first amazing New Orleans woman that I grew to know and love, you won't be the last.
Yeah.
That there's somebody in Metairie right now who's going to change the world and even change my life in ways that you did, and that keeps me hopeful.
I
And if
love
you
it.
and I don't live to see it, your daughters and Miles will live to see it,
Yeah.
and that's good enough. 'Cause we come from a place where we don't we don't define history in lifetimes. Right? We know
That's
it's
the
bigger.
truth.
We know it's much bigger than that.
Yeah, and it's so
And
important to
so
remember that and embrace
that's
it and
exactly right.
celebrate that.
We're a
I'm
point on a line. We come from someplace and we're going someplace.
Yeah.
And we just have to play our part in this right now and make it possible for the miles of the world to take us the
Mhm.
next step of the way.
Oh, there you are, Jeff, that beautiful perspective. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much for
much.
that.